Chapter 2. Great as has been the world's wonder at the uprising of Mr. Bryan's struggling masses in the city by the sea, and the narrow escape of its magnificent homes from fire and brand, yet greater still was the wonderment when the news was flashed across the land that Chicago did not stand in need of a single federal soldier. Chicago is mad, but it is the madness of joy. Chicago is in the hands of a mob, but it is a mob made up of her own people, noisy, rude and boisterous, the natural exultation of a suddenly enfranchised class, but bent on no other mischief than glorying over the villainous and self-seeking souls who have ground the faces of the poor and turned the pitiless screw of social and political power into the hearts of the common people, until its last thread had been reached, and despair pressed its lupine visage hard against the door of the laboring man. And yet, at this moment when the night air quivered with the mad vociferations of the common people, that the Lord had been good to them, that the wicked money-changers had been driven from the temple, that the stony-hearted usurers were beaten at last, that the people's William was at the helm now, that peace and plenty would in a few moons come back to the poor man's cottage, that silver was king, king at last, the world still went wondering why red-eyed Anarchy, as she stood in Haymarket Square, with thin arms aloft, with wild mien and wilder gesticulation, drew no bomb of dynamite from her bosom, to hurl at the hated minions of the law who were silent spectators of this delirium of popular joy. Why was it thus? Look and you shall know why white-robed peace kept step with this turbulent band and turned its thought from red-handed pillage. He was there, the master spirit to hold them in leash. He, and he alone, had lifted Bryan to his great eminence. Without these 24 electoral votes, Bryan had been doomed, hopelessly doomed. He, and he alone, held the great commonwealth of the West hard and fast in the democratic line. Hence he came as conqueror, as kingmaker, and the very walls of the sky-touching edifices trembled as he was dragged through the crowded streets by this orderly mob, and 10 times 10,000 of his creatures bellowed his name and shook their hats aloft in mad exultation. You're our savior. You've cleaned the temple of liberty of its foul horde of usurers. We salute you. We call you king-maker. Bryan shall call you master too. You shall have your reward. You shall stand behind the throne. Your wisdom shall make us whole. You shall purge the land of this unlawful crowd of moneylenders. You shall save the Republic. You are greater than Washington. You're a better friend of ours than Lincoln. You'll do more for us than Grant. We're your slaves. We salute you. We thank you. We bless you. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. But yet this vast throng of tamed monsters, this mighty mob of momentarily good-natured haters of established order, broke away from the master's control for a few brief moments, and dipped their hands in the enemy's blood. The deed was swift as it was terrible. There were but 4 of them, unarmed, on pleasure bent. At sight of these men, 1,000 throats belched out a deep and awful growl of hatred. They were brave men, and backed against the wall to die like brave men, stricken down, beaten, torn, trampled, dragged. It was quick work. They had faced howling savages in the far west, painted monsters in human form, but never had they heard such yells leave the throats of men, and so they died, 4 brave men, clad in the blue livery of the Republic, whose only crime was that some months back, against the solemn protest of the master, their comrades had set foot on the soil of the Commonwealth, and saved the metropolis of the West from the hands of this same mob. And so Chicago celebrated the election of the new president who was to free the land from the grasp of the money-lenders, and undo the bad business of years of unholy union between barterers and sellers of human toil and the lawmakers of the land. Throughout the length and breadth of the South, and beyond the Great Divide, the news struck hamlet and village like the glad tidings of a new evangel, almost as potent for human happiness as the heavenly message of 2,000 years ago. Bells rang out in joyful acclaim, and the very stars trembled at the telling, and the telling over and over of what had been done for the poor man by his brethren of the North, and around the blazing pine knots of the southern cabin and in front of the mining camp fires of the far west, the cry went up, "Silver is king! Silver is king!" Black palms and white were clasped in this strange love feast, and the dark-skinned grandchild no longer felt the sting of the lash on his sire's shoulder. All was peace and goodwill, for the people were at last victorious over their enemies who had taxed and tithed them into a very living death. Now the laborer would not only be worthy of his hire, but it would be paid to him in a people's dollar, for the people's good, and now the rich man's coffers would be made to yield up their ill-gotten gain, and the sun would look upon this broad and fair land, and find no man without a market for the product of his labors. Henceforth, the rich man should, as was right and proper, pay a royal sum for the privilege of his happiness, and take the nation's taxes on his broad shoulders, where they belong.